Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today I am bringing you my December wrap-up. So I had a couple of goals for the month of December, which I never got to mention to you guys because I was on an unintentional hiatus. But one of the things that I really wanted to do in December was finish up some series. So I had quite a bleak TBR of a lot of series ends, and I ended up actually finishing or catching up with 4 series. Which is really awesome because if you're new here, I am a notorious series abandoner, not for any reason other than I am such a mood reader that they get lost in the shuffle a little bit. So that was really awesome. I ended up reading 11 books, 4 of those finished up series, and yeah, it was a really good reading month. So jumping straight in, the very first book that I read last month was Redemptor by Jordan Fueko. This is the sequel to the book Raybearer, which was one of my top books of 2020, and also this is the final book in the Raybearer duology, and this kind of sparked the idea of finishing some series. This series follows a young woman named Tari Sai, and she is basically raised for one purpose, and that is to kill the crown prince, who will soon become emperor. However, she ends up becoming friends with him, joins his council, and things get very muddied from there. It's a really wonderful series, you guys. If you haven't picked up Raybearer, the hype is real. Both of these books are absolutely wonderful and such gorgeous YA fantasy. I really loved the characters in Raybearer. That was kind of one of the big standout things. That the world is amazing, I really enjoy her writing, but the characters, especially Tari Sai herself, just fantastic, and that very much continues in this book. The one thing that I would say about this is that there's a lot in here, and I would have loved to have seen some of it a little bit better fleshed out, maybe add an extra 200 pages to this book because I just wanted more and more. But I think of all the negative things that I could say about a book, that's actually not too bad. I just really desperately wanted more because I really love this series. So I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars, would definitely recommend it. In the last few months of 2021, I was reading a lot of thrillers and crime fiction, and so I picked up One of Us Is Next by Karen M. McManus. This is the sequel to One of Us Is Lying, which I read a couple of years ago, and I really enjoyed. I really liked it, and I think that this one was actually much better. So this cover is making my camera freak out a little bit, sorry about that, but One of Us Is Lying is a YA crime book where basically 5 students are given detention, one of them ends up dying, so naturally the other 4 are under suspicion, and you get each of their points of view. It's a really great concept, and it was fine execution. I really enjoyed it. It was good fun. This one I thought, as I say, was much better. It takes place 18 months after the events of the first book, and we have some of those characters popping back up, but we follow a new cast of characters, including, little sisters and friends of those original 4. I thought that this was great. I think she's become a much stronger writer since she wrote that very first book. There's another book in between this that's a standalone. So she's obviously been writing more and more, and I think that really shows. I thought this was really fun. I think I gave One of Us Is Lying 4 stars, and I gave this 4 stars as well. And then next up, I switched to historical fiction. I listened to the audiobook for The Last Garden in England by Julia Kelly. Just as a note, I feel like it is probably pretty important to say Julia Kelly is my big sister, and so perhaps I am a little bit biased, but I thought this book was fabulous. So this book takes place across multiple timelines with multiple women kind of telling their stories, and it all centers around a particular garden, a historic garden in the English countryside. I really love this. The audiobook is particularly good. It's a really fabulous multicast audiobook. I really love the characters in this. I think the audiobook narrators did a really fabulous job of bringing those characters to life, and I really enjoyed the plot and all of the kind of interweaving storylines and time periods. That's not always something that I think works really well, but I think Julia did a very good job with that. So I feel like I can't really give this one a star rating because it feels a little disingenuous because she is my sister, but I really enjoyed this one. If you like historical fiction, especially sort of World War II era, whether it takes place like, in the action or sort of aside from the action, I would recommend her. She's great. She has nice hair. So another part of my finishing series project was The Bone Ship's Wake by R.J. Barker. You guys know how much I love these books. The first and second ones took the top spot for best book of the year in the years that they came out, and this one is definitely going to be up there as well. Oh man, Oh, this one hurt. So really fun story time, just really quickly. I was reading this in bed. I was finishing it up. My husband was next to me and he had like his headphones on and he was watching like TikTok videos or whatever. And I kind of, as we got to the end, because we all know it's an R.J. Barker book, it's going to have a tragic ending. I was like, I had silent tears rolling down my face and I was good. I was fine until he turned and looked at me and was like, oh my God, what's wrong? And I lost it. I burst into tears. I like let the floodgates open and he literally had to hold me for an hour. His shirt got really soggy because I was just bawling into his arms. So yeah, this book ruined my life. I would definitely recommend it. The series takes place in a world that is mostly water, so it is a seafaring society. There's not a whole lot of land, and as the title kind of indicates, the ships that these people use are built of these massive dragon bones. In the very first book, the dragons have basically been hunted to extinction, so there are no more bone ships being built. However, when the first book starts, a sea dragon has been spotted for the first time in decades, and the race is on between the people who want to hunt it and kill it, and the people who want to save it to try to stop this pointless war between their people and the Gaunt Islanders kind of next door. I love this. I love this series so much. It's just, you know, it's beautifully written. He's a really, really wonderful writer. It's quite a beautiful lyrical writing style, and the characters are incredible, and it's just, yeah, it's I really love this. If you have been victimized by R.J. Barker, let me know. We can talk about that ending, because it's such a good ending to the series, but oh, I was emotionally destroyed. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Would cry again. I decided to go into a little bit of a different direction because I was feeling a little bit of the book hangover after I finished The Bone Ship's Wake. So I decided to pick up something very different. And this is one I've been wanting to read for a very long time. And it's a weird one. It's going to be a little bit difficult to explain because I think the less you know, the better. So this is The Last House on Needless Street by Katrina Ward. This book, I guess you could kind of call it a thriller. It doesn't seem to quite feel right, but I think it's one of those sort of genre-defying books, I think. So I would call this a thriller, and you have multiple points of view that all center on this particular man and the disappearance of a young girl nearby. And I have a feeling, and having checked some of the Goodreads reviews after I read this, that this is a very divisive book. Either you love it, like I did, or it is not your thing. And I don't think there's any real way of predicting which it's gonna be. I would say give it a go if you are interested. If it sounds like something that sort of captures your interest, you find it a little bit intriguing, I would definitely recommend picking this up. It's a trip, and I can't even say sort of like what it's ultimately about and everything like that because that would be spoilers, but I thought the way that she handled this book was really, really great and really interesting. I can also see why other people didn't love it. It's a weird one. It's really hard to explain. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. It's a really, really good read, but I just don't think it's possible to really give you more than that, which isn't very helpful, I realize. Having enough of trauma, I decided to go ahead and read 2 graphic novels. The first is Sheets by Brenna Thumler, and then I also read the sequel, which is Delicates. Sheets was a gift from my lovely friend Sally, and I loved it so much I went ahead and I bought the sequel as well. I think I talk about this first one in my Christmas book haul video, but basically we follow a girl named Marjorie in the 90s, and her mother has just passed away and she's desperately trying to keep the family business running and operating because her father has basically fallen apart. Her little brother is too young to really help out at all, and Marjorie, who is 13, kind of has to take on the responsibility of the head of the household and keeping this business afloat while there are outside threats trying to shut them down. Now on the other side of things, we have a ghost named Wendell who finds his way into our world and ends up bumbling into Marjorie's laundromat, and they end up, after some miscommunications and misunderstandings, becoming friends. So it's wonderful. It's really very sweet. As I think I say in my other video, it's very sweet, but it's not overly sweet. A lot of this is about grief and recovery, and it's just really, really wonderful. The second book kind of deviates a little bit from that. Marjorie sort of begins to make some friends, and she sort of gets drawn into this more popular crowd, and she falls into kind of some of the antics of that friend group. So she is not directly responsible for the bullying of this other character, but she's part of it. And so this book is a lot about bullying and standing up for yourself and standing up for other people. And while it is a little bit of a departure, especially for Marjorie's character, at least in the first one, I really, really enjoyed it. I thought that it was fabulous, and I think these would be really, really great reads for younger kids. They are middle grade graphic novels, because I think that they have such a poignant sort of moral to them, but they're not preachy. They're just really, really lovely books. So I gave both of these 4.5 out of 5 stars. I would highly, highly recommend these. So it's not the last book that I read, but the last of the sort of series finishers for December. I read The Wisdom of Crowds by Joe Abercrombie. I had wanted to read this a lot earlier, but as I mentioned, I was reading a lot of crime fiction and thrillers and horror books, and I just didn't have fantasy brain for a really long time, so I didn't get around to this sort of as promptly as I would have wanted to. He's one of my favorite authors. I love this series. This is one of my favorite fantasy series ever now, and I am really glad I held off on it, but oh boy, this is heavy. So the Age of Madness trilogy, of which this is the last book, takes place 30 years after the events of the First Law trilogy, and it's very Industrial Revolution, and then in this last book, French Revolution. And the way that he concluded this book and drew everything together was so good. He's just, I think, one of the best fantasy writers out there. He's incredible, and this is a sign of that. Obviously his writing is amazing and his world building is amazing. I think those are some of the things that he's really well known for. He's an incredibly funny writer. At the same time, some real grim stuff is going on in his books, but his characters, for me, continue to be the place where he shines. Savine Danglokta is probably one of my favorite fantasy characters ever of all time. She's wonderfully nuanced and complicated. She's just incredible. I love her. I would never want to meet her, but I love her so much. And I feel like he did a really good job of boosting up some of the other characters in this book. I've never been a big fan of Ricky in the North, but I think that sort of the way that he rounded out her story in this book was really phenomenal and fabulous, and I love his character arcs, even though they hurt me. They hurt me a lot. They hurt me a lot in this book. This was a 5 out of 5 star read. This is one that is going to land on my best books of 2021 list when I get around to making that video. Ooh, yeah. Special shout out to Scottish Husband and my friend Sally for dealing with me while I was reading the second half of this book. It was a lot. Thanks. On Christmas Eve, I decided I wanted something a little bit Christmassy, a little bit murdery. So I read Hercule Poirot's Christmas by Agatha Christie. I love Agatha Christie and I love Poirot. He's my fave. So this is another locked room mystery. We have a sort of horrible, very wealthy invalid older gentleman who invites all of his wayward children to the family estate in the countryside under the guise of, you know, family togetherness at Christmas, but really it's to antagonize his horrible children because everyone in this family is horrible. So, so it's all of his children, I believe his two or three sons, their wives, and the daughter of his daughter who has passed away, so his granddaughter who he's never met. So naturally, being a nasty, horrible man, he is murdered and the police are called in, and Poirot happens to be in the vicinity, so he tags along. This is another really, really fun Agatha Christie mystery. She's just so good. She has that reputation for a reason, I think. And yeah, this was just a really fun little book to read on Christmas Eve. It had a great twist, as her books always seem to do, and I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And because I was 2 books short of last year's goal, toward the end of December, I ended up reading 2 novellas to kind of round out my numbers. So I read 126 books last year, which is the same number as the year before, which is pretty cool. So the first of the 2 novellas that I read to round out 2021 was Fireheart Tiger by Aliette de Bodard. This is a Vietnamese-inspired fantasy novel, and we follow a young woman who's sort of a princess of this land that's seen as quite barbaric, and she is having a secret affair with the princess of this kind of conquering land. And I really, really loved this. I've only ever read her sci-fi novellas. So I read The Tea Master and the Detective, and I think I've read another that's escaping me at the moment. But this is my first of her fantasy books, and this was beautiful. This is a very character-driven novella. We follow this one woman as she sort of progresses in this relationship, and you realize the kind of gaslighting and emotional abuse and manipulation, and her kind of growing and standing up for herself. And I feel like that's quite hard to have those sort of levels of character development in such a short book, because this is a very short novella, but I think she did an absolutely wonderful, wonderful job. I would highly, highly recommend this. It was just beautiful. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I read in December, and my final book of 2020, was Prime Meridian by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Were you aware that she wrote a sci-fi novella? Because I was unaware. And I consider myself to be a huge fan of hers, so that was shocking to me. So this is more of like a contemporary novel that kind of has a sci-fi flavor rather than like a straight up sci-fi book. So we follow a young woman in Mexico City as she is kind of scrimping her way through life. She had this she was on sort of like the right path. She was at university and she thought that she was gonna like go places with her life, but her mother ended up getting sick. She had to drop out, and things have never been quite the same since. But her one dream is to go to Mars because there are colonies on Mars. So it's mostly about her and kind of her life in this, you know, futuristic city that we do tend to see as sort of like, in a lot of sci-fi books, we see these places as being kind of very like glitzy and shiny and sort of super technologically advanced, but it's kind of the underside of those cities that we don't necessarily see in a lot of sci-fi works. And I thought she did a fantastic job with this, because Amelia, I believe her name is Amelia, is not the most likable character. She's difficult, but you get it. You understand her and her motivations. And speaking of novellas that are about toxic and abusive relationships, this one is another that sort of showcases that side of things, not just in romantic relationships, but also in friendships. I thought that this was a fabulous read. It was not what I was expecting. I thought it would have been more of like space opera-y sci-fi type thing, but it was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. There are a couple of things that I wish that we got a little bit more of, like the sci-fi elements, like the Mars elements, but it was great. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So that is it for my December wrap-up. Those are all the books that I read at the end of last year. I would love to hear in the comments below if you've read any of these books or what your favorite books of December were. I post bookish content to this channel fairly frequently, so go ahead and hit subscribe, check back soon, and I will see you next time.